It's now 8 o'clock. Do you wish to continue for a while, or?
That's fine.
Okay.
If you got more questions.
Thank you.
A lot more questions. What is the term of years in the long-term contracts?
10 to 15 years typically.
Have you ever or will you ever use right of eminent domain to go through a small community that is clearly opposed to your pipeline?
Well, I think Jim talked about the process that we use for land acquisition and the work that we're going to do to negotiate with landowners. But if we have a situation where we can't reroute the line, we can't reach accommodation with the landowner, the pipeline has to connect at the end of the day. And if the federal regulators and other regulators determine it's in the public interest, we're going to need to connect those pieces. So we'll do everything we can to avoid that, but at the end of the day, much like if a road is being constructed, the road has to meet. So that would be part of the process.
Will there eventually be a third compressor station on this pipeline, possibly in Warwick?
The determination of additional compression will be based upon how much capacity we have reserved on the line. So the maximum capacity is about 2.2 billion, Mark, cubic feet per day. That's the maximum capacity. We would look at that as having the 36-inch piece, and additional compression would be needed. Where those would be located would be an engineering-based process on where we would need that compression. We haven't determined that yet. However, that will be a regulated process like the pipe siting itself. So if, when we file for our FERC certificate, if we've identified 2 compressor stations, that's what we are seeking our permits for. If we identify others, they will be listed in our permit application. So there's a certification process for compression stations. And if we wanted to add compression down the road, you simply can't add a compressor station to a project. You have to go through a new FERC approval process for additional compression.
Where is the pipe for the pipeline manufactured?
We haven't determined the sourcing. There's mills all over the world now, but a lot in the United States, a lot overseas, but we haven't gotten that far yet on this.
What determines that a project will not be completed?
I don't know.
So,
There's different.
from a regulatory perspective, I guess we could default back to the public interest argument. If through this review process, the regulators determine that there isn't an additional need for this pipeline capacity, could be one reason they would decide. They could believe it's not environmentally compatible. The company itself could decide to withdraw its application. Those are some examples I can think of.
I can't really read the writing on this, but I'll try. So far, you've only released small-scale maps or town maps piecemeal. Will you release large-scale?
Large-scale GIS shape files so we can understand where the route will go.
Go ahead.
No, we're still early in the process, so when we get more definitive information on where things are, and part of our survey gathering is to gather that information, and as Jim alluded to in the survey, we gather everything on the GIS, it's all put on a GIS system. We share shape files with agencies, but it takes a lot of work to get all that data collected and put together on a definitive route. So we're just not at that point at this time.
I was speaking about the proposed route, not the definitive route. Because you obviously have shape files to make those maps.
As far as the proposed, yeah, it's just so preliminary at this point that we're looking at. We just haven't finalized them enough to release them at this point.
Will you come back and build additional lines along this route in the future if you decide there is sufficient demand?
Well, the purpose of this project and the scoping process we're undergoing right now is to satisfy what we believe will be the generational needs of New England. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and beyond. And so that's why we're taking the time now to determine how big of a pipe we need that's going to satisfy the long term, and making sure we have enough capacity on this line. Now, does that rule out there would never be additional construction, or looping as it's called, when you co-locate a pipeline next to an existing pipeline? No, but our design and our purpose in this is to build a pipeline that will service the needs, the long-term needs of New England, not short-term.
What is your definition of generational?
Do you no longer have interest from Canada and Maine for this gas?
We do have interest. Maine, for example, Maine passed legislation last year that actually authorized the state of Maine to, the state itself, to reserve capacity on a pipeline. It's really unprecedented in this type of project, and for a state entity itself to have the ability to reserve capacity. Usually that's for distribution companies, utilities, power plants. So they are very interested, and right now they're working through the process of how to implement that and how to make that reservation, how to make it all work, because they are in somewhat on uncharted territory. So they are interested, the state of Maine is genuinely. And I've met with the governor of Maine, as our team has, and we're certainly talking to their public utilities folks about that currently. Canada has some interest, I think. They have some issues with capacity, and some of the natural gas that was coming in from areas in Canada is not as plentiful as it used to be, so they're looking for a longer-term solution. So I think there is Canadian interest in the project as well.
Is this planned to be a looped pipeline?
Well, the first part is. So this part here is a loop, which basically a loop is locating the pipeline next to an existing pipeline, more or less. So this part is at the beginning.
What do you mean by surveillance? I think that's
Aerial surveillance?
Oh, yeah, one of the things is patrol, it's aerial patrol, so we call it pipeline surveillance, where you're actually looking at the pipeline. We'll do it by ground patrol, and we'll do either, depending on the population, monthly, it could be weekly. In this area, probably be monthly. You'll see a helicopter. You know, if there was a pipeline here, like in these areas, the helicopter flies over, or fixed wing, and the patrol just basically looks for any encroachments on the pipeline, is the primary thing they look at, and then surveillance. So by surveillance, it's just, observation of the pipeline. Not any CIA intel or anything like that, it's just observation.
If no landowners agreed to let you survey their properties, would you abandon the project?
No, but we haven't had that situation where no landowners have. We currently have landowners that have given a survey. I think overall, Jim, on the project?
In the entire project, which covers Connecticut, New York, and Mass, we're at approximately 37% of that. Yeah.
So we'll continue to work at getting survey permission from landowners.
I think you answered this, but when you say this pipeline is generational, how many years do you mean?
Generational. Potentially, I say generational because there's been talk in the industry and analysts about if natural gas is a bridge entity, how long is that bridge? Is it, and some folks have put 25, 30 years out there as a time period when natural gas is going to be the prevalent energy before we can get to a time period where renewables become the prevalent energy. There's a time period that needs to happen there for those renewable technologies to develop. So that's the kind of the time period we're talking about. But for a project, and we realize the impacts a project like this is going to have, you want to make it a project where it is going to be for the long term. And long term may be a better word for that, but for the supply needs, we believe that New England will have as long as natural gas is the prevalent energy supply for the region.
Okay, I think you've answered most of the questions that I have here. And I will open it up to the audience. If you will speak one person at a time, raise your hand to be recognized. Yes?
Hi, are there alternative routes that you could possibly put this pipeline on, like along Route 90? And if so, why aren't you pursuing those as well?
Like Alan was saying earlier, we try to relocate, we try to co-locate along power lines, along other pipelines in the area, along other corridors is one of our primary. As far as co-locating in highways, there's a lot of issues with that in being able to construct safely along a highway, being able to, or even a roadway, a secondary road, to be able to maintain the pipeline during that, because you have a lot of activity there, you've got your cathodic protection I was talking about, there's a lot of interference. So for a cross-country transmission line like this, and a larger diameter line, it's really not practical for long distances to co-locate an entire route, and so that's primarily why we're not doing that. And then as far as the southern route, number one, it's a longer way to market, and it impacts a lot more areas. I know it's not this area, but it impacts a lot more areas, and there's several lines in that corridor there, and the growth has come around that corridor. So when we looked at this, there were several route adjustments made, looking at different critical areas to try to avoid certain forests, certain water bodies, certain things. And this is the route we've come up with now to come out and start looking for survey permission, and we're still getting feedback. So part of the FERC analysis is there will be alternative analysis. There'll be localized alternative analysis. Why did you cross a stream here versus here? Why did you build straight across the state instead of coming here? So those analysis will have to be done as part of the process, and for the regulators to evaluate that. Short answer is the road corridors is just not a practical solution for a pipeline of this nature.
If this was a 36-inch pipeline at maximum capacity of flow, how many compressor units would be needed in addition? And if you don't know the answer tonight, could you get back to us on that, please?
Well, that would, right now it's designed for the 2 compressor stations for the volume we're looking at
But
now.
not a 36-inch line, I don't think you said. I think you said 30.
Well, I think the 30 and the 36,
If we were, but Mark, if we were to be full capacity, 2.2, 36-inch line, we need
I
additional compression.
think we need one more in between, 1 or 2 more. And I can't answer that now, but we can get back to that.
Yeah. Earlier in the evening, you were asked about the right-of-way for a pipeline and 50 feet for a 24-inch pipeline. Now I hear us talking about a 36-inch pipeline. Would you give us the right-of-way for that?
It would be the same.
The same.
Yeah, it would be 24 inch and up, unless we got to 48, and that's a different ballgame.
Yeah,
We're not
we
even talking about 48, so it would be the same. 50
50
for the
for
permanent
that.
right of way. You want.
Thank you. Aside from regulatory issues, what, in your estimation, your experience, would halt a pipeline of this kind? What kinds of things would get in the way besides regulatory issues?
Unless there was a fatal flaw that you couldn't physically build the pipeline for some reason, which we haven't seen yet. You may get to a point, we've had smaller projects where there may be a fatal flaw that you physically can't do something, construction-wise, but we don't see that. I'm just speculating. I mean, I haven't done that, but there's always a possibility to do that, but we believe we have a route that's buildable.
And those determinations are made before you apply
Before you
for permits.
apply and-
Because this extensive analysis that we're doing up front helps us identify any of those potential pitfalls that you might encounter during the process. So we're going in this full well knowing what we're going to be facing from a construction perspective, from folks like Bart who have been building these for almost 40 years. They know what they're getting into, so we're gonna do that analysis up front, so we don't have those issues as we get into the process. That impacts everyone, the process. And we wanna do that now as we're still exploring the project.
You've listed the number of pipeline miles as 250 at one point, and also as 179 being the main pipeline. You did an article for the New Hampshire Business Review last year in which you said you were going to build legs to Keene, Jaffrey, and New Ipswich, New Hampshire, and you had a map of it. The map would seem to indicate the total length of those legs being about 70 miles. One of them was to Keene, and it appeared to go through the center of Warwick, going through my farm, past the Unitarian Church, through the center of town and north. You said that you had substantial firm commitments for purchase of natural gas through those legs. Are they still under consideration?
I remember what you're referring to because I was at some of those meetings where we were talking about those with some of the folks in New Hampshire. And that's the fluidity of this process, is that the laterals that we are identifying now as we believe having firm commitment are not the laterals we identified even a few months ago. Those have changed. What you're talking about, Keene, that was at that time what we thought a viable potential lateral. It isn't now. Could it become again at some point as part of this application process or in the future? It's possible. Would the route be very different than the one that we were talking about before? Absolutely it could be. So that's all this development process. The only time that we will absolutely be certain about the pipeline that we're going to build is when we file our application. Then we're going to need to identify our route in our application. Then everyone will know what we're proposing. Could that, in future years, could an additional lateral based on need somewhere in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, anywhere on the system be possible? Yes, it's possible that others will want to sign up for this line in the future. And this being a FERC-regulated common carrier line, we're going to need to allow others have potential access to it. But what you were talking about then currently isn't part of the configuration of this project.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
You know, since I became involved in this, I was wondering how that purple line was drawn. A little bit colorblind, I thought it was blue. There was a character named Harold that had a purple crayon. I don't know if you lived in Houston, but you know, how was that line drawn? Tonight you told us that you didn't want to do it in the south. You wanted to do it in a more rural route, it almost sounded like, where there was less homes that you might interfere with. I'm not through with my question. And then you also told us that you really don't have any firm commitments from the customers, but you're obviously investing a lot of money in these meetings and traveling. Maybe you were up at Beaverbrook today in Hollis. How could you miss a piece of property like Beaverbrook on any map that you'd come across it and not know that was a protected land space? How could you draw a line through there? So can you tell me who drew this line, how and why, and how soon will it be erased? It almost seems like the Kinder Morgan Field of Dreams. You're gonna build it and your customers will come?
No, that's not what I do.
Well, let me see it. Let me show me the contracts of these companies. Or are they from?
I told you we don't have any contracts. How many times have I said that tonight? We don't have contracts on this project,
So
so we
explain
can't
to me-
show them to you.
Explain to me, please. How was the line drawn?
Well, the routing,
I can see the routing.
No,
Tell
I'm
me
saying-
how it was drawn. Why and who?
the basis for a route, when you start pipeline routing, is point A to point B. So you draw a line from Wright, New York to Drake it, that's A to B. That's fantastic. Then you start working it, and you say, what can I do? Well, the first part, I can go against my pipelines, I can follow my existing easements all the way into Massachusetts. But then I've gotta get back up to Drake. And then I follow contours, the terrain, I follow open space, I make sure I can get at creeks and rivers and try to avoid as much as I can. And yes, we use Google Earth, a lot of Google Earth to route that. And I pick a route where I can build a pipeline, and on the map, if I can identify major things, major river crossings, avoid things, we'll do avoidance, we'll come through. Something like Beaver Brook, the lateral there is the Nashua lateral, we had to go from point A to point B. If we're not in Beaver Brook Conservation, we're over in Brookline Conservation. If we're not there, we're in residential. So it's kind of like pick your poison, and we wanna get the route in the right area.
You take your poison.
Well, I didn't, bad terminology, it's not that we're trying to go through conservation areas, we're trying to route the best line we have available at that time before we get out on the ground to survey and get the other data.
And yet you're still not.
Sir, I think you've had your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, over here.
You plan to go before the Mass Department of Public Utilities to get permission to survey on land where landowners said no to surveying? And if so, when?
We've been working with landowners in this community and across the Commonwealth since January 15th. And we'll continue to work with the landowners as long as we can. But one of the processes that's available to us is to go to the Mass DPU. So for those properties that we can, through discussion, through routing, and hopefully through some of the insight we've given you tonight, if we can't work out something to get onto your property, then yes, we will go through the Mass DPU. Those people whose properties are affected have received some letters and will receive another letter. So the process is continuing, and we expect to file with the DPU towards the end of the month, the 1st of June, to answer your question specifically.
I used to live in Danvers, Mass. in the late 60s and 70s. They built a Pinnacle, I think it was Pinnacle, built a pipeline right next to my property, well, my parents' property. And it seemed like every quarter mile or something, there was this pipe that came up like this, like you see in Papa landfill. What is that, and does your pipeline going to have the same thing?
That's a casing pipe. When we used to cross roads, we would put for example, if it's a 30-inch pipeline, we would put a 36-inch pipe across the road with casing, and the pipe was put in it, and then the vents, those are vents that come up from the casing to vent any kind of air or anything that might be in there. It's just called a casing vent. So if you see that pipe that goes down, there's casing on each, it's at the road crossings, correct? You had it?
There was one near.
Near a road crossing, you wouldn't see it out in the open, but it was a casing vent. And you see a lot of marker posts too, but usually they're not metal.
You said that the easement is 50 feet for this thing. Did you mean maintenance easement or construction?
That was permanent easement.
Perfect. And what do you need for construction?
And I tried to indicate that it would vary depending upon construction needs, Mark's needs, and that's going to be based on terrain, wetlands, improvements, roads. So that could vary from 50 to 150, depending on generally.
You know, pipeline like this would be 100, 125 feet general.
From both sides?
No, just total. And in wetlands, we're limited to a certain width, and in roads, you might have bigger width because you need access. So.
And another question. Did you know that your proposed power pipeline line in Warwick goes through the most protected area of the town in the southern part? Did you know?
Protected
I mean from conservation point of view. It was actually 2 years ago, I believe, added to protected woodland area.
Is it in ACEC? Do you know if it's in an area of critical environmental concern?
No, that's not, I don't think so, but still, from all the town land, you picked up the most protected Did you know that?
Well, and I believe that we met with the town, Joe did, and at one point we had survey permission, which would have given us the opportunity to learn that and learn that property. And
But it's listed in DEP, so.
Jeanette, can you show us the map? Start leaning against the wall.
Yes.
Yeah.
My question is, I guess in regards to surveying, working things out with people that may not feel very comfortable with the situation.
what was it, I'm sorry, the first
So
part?
my question is, I know, well, you know, the woman in Richmond that has 3 pipelines on her property, and you've just asked for this 4th pipeline that would take out her water, her well. Has that reached a good conclusion that she's satisfied with?
And that was brought up at a meeting that we had earlier, and I spoke at that meeting and let you know that we wouldn't take someone's well, and we wouldn't do that.
So what I'm asking is.
But it hasn't gone
Yeah.
further than that yet, because we haven't done our survey yet, the mitigation on how to avoid it hasn't happened yet. So that will happen, and you can continue to ask me, and I'd be happy to answer, but until we actually get on the ground and do the survey, and construction looks at it, and they let us know how they're gonna construct, then I can't give you an answer specifically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you explain, please, the process? So say many people don't allow surveys on a property, so then you go to the regulatory agencies in Massachusetts, and they give you permission, then what happens to all the people who have denied surveying? How does that process work?
Well, after we're given the right to enter a property, then we would still work with the owner through contact, through communication, because you want to know what's happening on your property, and we want you to know what's happening on your property.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be a neighbor, because I would want the same thing. So I put myself in your shoes, and I'm going to call you, I'm going to knock on your door, I'm going to let you know when we're on your property. I'm going to continue to work with you. I'm not going to be a stranger. I'm not going to be uncontactable, I guess that's a word, but I'm going to continue to work with you. And then, once we gather the information that we need to make a proposal, then we'll go through that acquisition process, where we then have plans. And I can come and I can meet with you, and I can talk to you about the plans. I can tell you whether it's going to be 75 feet temporary workspace, where the 50 feet is going to be, what tree is going to be cut, what's going to happen. So that whole process will continue until hopefully we can reach an agreement.
So you are coming to my property and telling me what you just said, just you?
Well, one of the agents that do the same thing that I do, do you want more than one of us contacting you? There's gonna be a crew that's out there, and let's say you wanna go out and meet with the crew. Let's say you wanna go out and see what they're doing. We would embrace that. Of course, we want you to be safe, so we might, we're gonna wear hard hats, we're gonna wear steel-toe shoes, we're gonna wear safety glasses, that's the way we do our business. So again, it's that interaction that we're hoping for.
Thank you for answering.
Yeah, I want to go back to the drawing board. I know you probably have a lot of bean counters and engineers that put this purple line across the top of the state, but isn't it less expensive to put an above-ground pipe along a pre-existing route, like a loop route where you have this existing one? I don't see how digging up and going through all this pristine land is going to be less expensive than putting an above-ground pipe that you can monitor. It won't leak underground. I'm assuming you're using electrolytic corrosion preventative on your pipe, right? What, just out of curiosity, what's the mill thickness
Of the
coating?
it's 14 to 16 mil fusion bond.
Okay, all right, that's good. Why is it cheaper to do that? Because that's why you're doing it, right? That it's less expensive.
To be honest, we've never analyzed an above-ground pipeline across the border, just from a practicality and all the standards that, one of the pipeline safety standards that we have to comply by require buried pipelines. And so for the most part, everything's buried, and, just at crossings, you know, it's kinda like, I live in Houston, it's kinda like the train track they built down Main Street. It's not a very effective main train track because it's down the middle of the street, and you still have intersections. It's not a subway like when I go to Boston and get in the subway, you know, there's no intersections. So that's kinda like a pipeline. Once it's installed and buried, you don't see it. You see the above ground markers, you'll see some valve locations, maybe a compressor station over 100 miles, you'll see one compressor station. So once it's installed and once it's buried, it's safe, it's out of sight. The only thing that's left is the permanent easement, so it's just a whole different concept of above ground piping. So to be honest, it's really not something we've evaluated as being a practicality.
Well, like, excuse me, I want to continue this, if I may, the difference between being above ground and underground. You had a spill yesterday in South Carolina, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't familiar with it. I know it was brought up here. But
Well, it's in the Reuters, it's in the Wall Street Journal, and, you know, it made the headlines. Was that above ground or below ground? It was at a compressor station. I guess that's,
gasoline, one of the other businesses.
well, this is what this is what we're concerned about. Our leaks, things that we can't see, things that you don't seem to be able to control. That's why I'm very nervous about this. I live miles away from where the pipeline is compared to some of the people here in the room. And the stuff that goes into the ground travels miles underground. This is an aquifer almost. This is where a lot of Boston's water and our local community's water comes from. We're on a hill. And you're going to put a pipeline underground where we can't see it. And you're going through conservation land. And you think this is a better idea than putting something along an existing route. Route 2 has a medial strip that's so big that people who go out of control in the winter can't get from one side to the other. Why can't you go down the center? Look into the feasibility of that. It seems like you haven't even looked at that. Are there really regulations that prevent you from doing that? Thank you.
Can I ask what the valves are that you just mentioned along the road?
Yeah, you want, the way a pipeline's designed, you have valve spacing, so that you have every, say, 12 miles, and I'm not, you know, it varies on whether you're, where it's at, but you have certain valves, shut-off valves, just like in your home, you have a shut-off valve by the street maybe, and you have one going in the house. So every so often, there's shut-off valves that are controlled, and it's the way we operate the pipeline. Should we have to take a segment and maintain it?
How far apart is every so often?
It varies, I was gonna say, it varies from 8 to 16 miles, depending on where you're at. And someone asked earlier, I just wanna clarify, if there's a difference in construction techniques in rural versus, say, more congested areas. The construction standards are the same, but your valve spacing and your type of, your thickness of your pipe is different. So your valve spacing could be anywhere from 16, 20 miles to 8 miles from any point to a mainline valve.
Yes.
I have a question regarding safety. Kinder Morgan has a bad track record with regards to pollution. Ever since 2004, you've been fined by the EPA for violating the Clean Air Act. You've been fined by the federal government $1 million for the violating the Clean Air Act. You've been under investigation.
What's your question?
Standards. My question is, why should we feel that the environmental impact of this pipeline in our town would fare any better than these other communities where these spills have occurred?
Well, this is a transparent process, and we're one of the few companies that post on our website our safety record. In fact, I don't know any other major energy companies that do that. So you can go to our website and see our safety record. And if there are incidents, there's certainly a lot of public scrutiny of that. So the incidents you cited, you found somewhere on the internet. I'm not sure where you got your information. But it's a transparent process, and we're proud of our record. We're an industry leader in integrity management and safe operation of systems. But transportation of energy is the transportation of energy. Now, the U.S. Department of Transportation that regulates pipelines says it's the safest way of transporting energy. Underground transportation of pipelines. Now the gentleman left, but this is the U.S. Department of Transportation that regulates the operation of pipelines. Have said, and you can certainly go to their website and see this, that the underground transportation of energy is the safest way to transport. Not completely safe, but it's the safest way to transport. But companies need to invest the time and energy and resources into operating their assets safely.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could address the issue of firefighting. Should there be an accident or should there be a fire near or on a pipeline or a leak at the same time? And how would the firefighting equipment differ and the different techniques of fighting such a fire?
Sure, and one of the services that we provide to communities is education. And we have a department that's called damage prevention. And there's a team of gentlemen that go out to fire departments and discuss that very topic. What should we know? Because not every...
Is there equipment that's needed as well?
And I'll get there.
Special
Yeah, not really though, but I'll get there. They'll talk about what to expect and what to do. One of the fire fighting techniques for the emergency responders is to evacuate the area. And this is after there could be a leak. Not necessarily a fire, because the two don't have to happen at the same time. Natural, you're right, it's a good thing, and it's certainly nothing that we want, absolutely. But natural gas in its purest state that's in the pipeline is not going to ignite. It would put out a match if you put it next to the pipe. It would, because you have to have a combustible atmosphere. And when it comes out of the pipe, it's pure. It won't ignite. And matter of fact, we can weld on live pipe that has gas escaping. That flame, when it does come, controlled, this is controlled, when that flame does happen, it's up in the air where at some point you have that mixture. So you don't have to have the two happening at the same time. So let's say that there was a fire, that it did happen, God forbid. And we would train the fire responders to evacuate the area, cordon off so that no one gets into the area so that they're at a safe distance. And they would let the fire burn because we have automatic valves that Mark just talked about.
The valves we talked about would close.
They have automatic valves. Based on pressure differential, they'll close. So what that equates to is when you're done cooking on your barbecue and you turn off the propane and the flame goes out, obviously our pipeline's not that quick, but the same thing happens. You take away the fuel so that then the flame goes down. So the emergency responders are going to be focusing on public safety first and foremost. That's what we're going to teach them. And two, they're going to take care of the peripheral buildings that could catch fire. So to answer your question specifically, there's not specific equipment that they need that's any different than what they're already using. Because the natural gas, again, we would let it burn. They would know that though, because we wouldn't want them to go, we wouldn't want a fire official to go to one of our valve sites and open up a valve thinking he closed it. And that's what we're going to train them also. Don't touch the valves, because again, that would be putting that fuel back into the source where it would start.
And do you not put it out because you can't?
You can't. You basically
put it
can't.
out.
No,
Because
it's too
that's
hot.
why
So
you
you let
let
it
it
burn.
burn,
You
because it can't
take
burn.
away the fuel, and that's how you do it.
I find it ironic that you keep mentioning your permanent easements and how seriously you take your stewardship responsibilities, where you patrol and you monitor and probably enforce against any encroachments. So with that in mind, why are you so seriously proposing to violate our permanent conservation easements that we also take seriously the responsibility to steward?
Honestly, I've been involved in the construction of pipelines in New England since the very early 80s. Both Mark and I have. And I can personally reflect on the construction techniques that are used and how the impact to existing wetlands and conservation land, except the removal of trees, granted, the trees are removed, restores after our construction techniques and after we install the pipeline. So although it would be hard for you to recognize that, not seeing it, I hope we've talked about putting some information together to show the before and after and how well they revegetate. So I won't try and convince you this evening, I understand, but the wetlands do come back, the conservation areas do accept the trees.
Thanks, I won't try to convince you either.
Yes, I'd like to speak of experience. I represent construction workers that might be doing this project. I also worked on the 1982.
Sir, do you have a question?
I have a statement because there was
No
questions about.
statements, just questions.
It was about blasting and
Thank you.
construction.
Yes, sir. No, yes.
Pardon me, I'm allowed to ask two questions?
I have another person.
You looked at me first.
I didn't,
Yes, you most certainly did. I would like to ask my
Yes, ma'am.
question.
I would like to know if you would be able to disclose the chemicals that are going to be coming along with this gas from the fracking process, and if you have knowledge of how many there would be, and if that will be disclosed.
There are no chemicals from the fracking, and as part of the application, the gas quality, the quality of gas is, you know, part of the application is to qualify as natural gas has to have certain qualities, but there's not, the gas quality standard for our gas that we put in the pipeline from fracking or offshore producing or anything is no different. So we get that question a lot.
So you're saying there are no chemicals from fracking that would be in those pipes?
Correct.
I'm wondering about the construction itself. Would that be a 24-hour thing, or is it dawn to dusk? How does that work?
Typically, it's dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. And there are times that they have to work longer on weekends. And should we have a directional drilling operation, and there are directional drills planned, that's where you drill under certain resources. That at times is a 24-hour operation. But typically the night work, you know, there are certain phases of the project that you get into schedule. Your standard work schedules, dusk to dawn. You know, typical union work is 10 hours a day, and through that. But there are off times. I don't want to say that construction would not be on weekends and that there will be operations at night, but we have noise limitations. We notify folks. So, but the standard is just done dawn to dusk.
What's the lifespan of the gas that you're pulling out of the Marcellus? How long will you be able to pass that?
Well, the Energy Information Agency is a good source of information about this. So they are talking about the Marcellus having potentially a 100-year supply of natural gas. And that's based on current estimations of the gas that's in reserve, if you will, or the gas that's already there at the Marcellus Shale, the ability to extract it with current technology, the estimations on usage and increased usage of natural gas. So that certainly can vary. If you talk about 25, 30 years ago, no one was talking about the Marcellus Shale. Now they're talking about a potential 100-year supply of Marcellus and related shale. But Marcellus has really been the game changer, not just for the region, but for the country in this potential, and we go back to the generational term or lifetime, whatever you want to call it, supply of natural gas.
So, the valves that you mentioned, like clearly there won't be, at least at this point, a compression station in Warwick, but we're likely to have at least 1 or 2 valves.
Yes.
What will be the security measures around those valves? Are they tamper-proof? Will you guys police it? Will you send another?
Well, the valve sites, the valves themselves, there would be a fence and a gate and a lock. We've secured all of our valve sites, all of our locations. The valves themselves, the equipment would be chained and whatnot, but that's the primary. And we don't patrol it every day. We count on good neighbors to keep the vandalism. We've had very little instances of that, but that's what it is. It's all fenced in and secured. There are areas, if we have areas, we may put security cameras in certain areas to try to patrol it, to monitor it.
Yeah, I want to go back to the very first question, which was actually from the U.S. Department of Energy. And it was, given a flat or declining electricity demand in the Northeast, how can we justify this new infrastructure? The question went on to talk about a proposed, and pay for it through a proposed tariff. But so with that in mind, my question is, you talked earlier, you said a lot in the public interest about this project, yet the FERC gives approval based on public convenience and necessity. So I would like you to explain to me what the difference is between, in your mind, between public interest and public convenience and necessity.
I'm using those interchangeably. The definition of what FERC is determining if the project is necessary. And so I'm using the term public interest in relation to that. It's in the public interest, and equating that to the construction of a roadway, for example. If they believe that this is necessary for, in this particular case, the distribution of energy, not the commerce piece, but the distribution of energy, they would approve it. It's in their discretion to do that. What was the first piece?
It was
electricity.
The flat or declining electricity
Right.
demand.
So there are a lot of variables. So natural gas for home heating, for example, that is certainly on the rise, and the need for additional natural gas. Power plants conversion to natural gas from coal, from other sources of energy. So power plant conversion is increasing the need for natural gas. The potential for other uses, even powering vehicles. There's been discussion of the increased technological viability of that. So all of the different potential new uses of natural gas is increasing the demand. Now, I'm not familiar with the electric piece that you're talking about and declining demand, but the use of natural gas for additional sources other than what's traditional is what's leading to the additional need for infrastructure, part of the reason for the additional need.
Yes.
Yes, you guys generally talk about the chemical composition of natural gas. Is it true that it's primarily methane?
96% of what I know is methane.
Primarily methane.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jim Hartman.
Yes.
You said, and we get this straight, that you could put a pipeline through a wetland and then put it back and it would look the same.
Over time it does. Except the woody vegetation, because it changes it from a forested wetland to a shrub brush wetland.
Well, the wetland that you're proposing to put this through is a wetland that Warwick bought because it has old growth black gum trees in it that were there when Warwick was founded.
And I would love to see it, I truly would. But that, again,
Yeah, I'm
brings...
sure you'd love to see it. Take it out.
I would, I expect it and appreciate it.
What I'm wondering is, you have a proof what you're talking about taking out.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to get on the property. And I think we've tried to make that clear, that, we want to be able to see what's out there. We have to learn what's out there. There could be rare species out there, I don't know, and we won't know until we get there. All of that is very important to us. Thank you.
The compressor stations that you have in use today and the ones that are building that need to be built somewhere along this pipeline, are they going to be methane powered or electric powered?
Right here is electric and right is methane. So right now it's both.
And
you don't know which ones you need.
yeah, I think right now the way we have it planned, Drake, is
electric.
electric and Wright's plan for natural gas.
Any in between?
We don't know, it would depend where the siting was and what was better. If there's no electric power near it and that's where we need to put it, then we'd probably end up with a natural gas.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a question about something that was in the presentation earlier. There were 6 newspaper headlines that were cited that call for, a need for additional natural gas supply in New England. One of them was from the Greenfield Recorder, and I have it here in front of me. It was in the Greenfield Recorder on March 19th, and actually the headline reads, "Gas line limits boost New England electricity prices." And actually that article was an Associated Press article that was a press release from ISO New England, which is the electric grid operator in New England. I would like to ask you if anyone at Kinder Morgan or working for Kinder Morgan had a hand in writing or generating that press release.
No.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to wrap my head around the construction of this pipeline, because I know that, when the glacier passed through, that left a kind of sawtooth form to the land, on ridges of solid rock, and you're going to go through there and blast down how far into those ridges of rock to create a smooth pathway for the pipe. And exactly how are you going to do that, and how deep are you going to blast in those situations?
Well, not knowing the specific, first we try to route around any kind of ridges, but there's 2 types of blasting. One is the right-of-way blasting. You need a right-of-way. We talked about 100 feet, 125 feet to actually have a right-of-way that you could go in and get your equipment, dig your trench, put your pipe. It's quite a big operation to build the pipe. That's why you need the space. So first you would have to grade it. The tractors today can take a lot of stuff out. We just got finished building in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. There's some hard rocks there. Sometimes you have to make a flat surface, so you're gonna blast some of these ridges off to get a flat area to build the pipeline. And then the trench itself, you want at least 36 inches of cover on your pipe. And if you have a 36-inch pipe, that's 6 feet. You want to go another 2 feet, so you might have an 8-foot deep trench, 15 foot wide on top of blasting. So you would have to blast that much, and it's never continuous. It's spotty, like you say. You may trench. In some areas you may be able to dig down, but you're gonna have to blast down enough to get your pipe in, and enough to get your area flat for your ridges.
So you're basically going to bring in road graders to clear this pathway.
It's not road graders, but you in some areas it's large tractors, large dozers, bulldozers. You don't see too many road graders on the road, but it doesn't have to be that rough. But it's big equipment, big dozers with blades.
So for the surveying, you mentioned archaeological things you're looking for. What would be an example of something that would, that you're looking for that would change the course of the
Well,
And I'm not a professional on archaeological investigations, but through my experience, there's different levels of archaeological discoveries. And we would have a professional, first, I'll back up, we have to get a permit just to be able to conduct our archaeological investigation. So it's overseen by the Massachusetts Natural Heritage Board. So that group oversees and dictates what and how we do our investigation. And our investigation is done by a third party, a professional that's what they do. And oftentimes, a lot of it's students. They're overseeing the people, but they're students that are studying that field. And there's 3 different levels of investigation, and it depends upon what they find. It's a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And depending upon the phase of what they find, dictates how much investigation they have to do. So a phase one would be a cursory view, I think they call it a meter investigation, and they have grids on their meters. And on the other end of that would be a phase three, where they go through and sterilize the entire area of discovery, categorize it, do whatever. So everything at that point would be removed.
So has that ever held up an
Well, there's
operation
two,
in the past?
that's a good question, there's a couple things. If you get to a point, you either have to avoid, and a lot of this, you know, you mitigate it or you avoid it. If you can't avoid it, and you have to have your route there, you can't make a minor change to your route, then you would have to go do a phase three dig, like Jim said. You'd have to do a full recovery and then come through that. And we've done both. We've done reroutes, because you get out there and you survey, and you find a sensitive resource, and the only way you can, there's no way to mitigate that sensitive resource.
So you go around it.
So you have to avoid that sensitive resource. If you have the time and the dollars, then you would go mitigate it, you would do a dig. Have we not built one because of that? No, but does it cause some confusion in construction? Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap this at 9 o'clock, because I think a lot of questions have been answered before. So please limit your questions briefly for the remaining section. Thank you.
Do you have any big commercial customers like Salem Power Plant or Pilgrim One that are interested in using your pipeline gas?
Oh, current? No, or any of those current? I don't think so. I know we service the main power plants in the area, but I don't know.
So, are any power plants using it now, or will they, or both?
Potentially. I can't say for certain on that, but potentially. They could potentially be a customer.
I want to thank you, first of all, for giving up 30% of your half-hour time to speak and giving us all this time to ask questions. How far does your pipeline, or where does your pipeline start? Do you actually go to the gas wellhead? Are you?
Our facility
Well,
started, yeah.
Well, Tennessee Gas Pipeline, and Kinder Morgan's a big company with different pipes, but I'm gonna talk about Tennessee Gas Pipeline. Traditionally, Texas and Louisiana was our gas supply. And all that gas back in the 70s, 80s, 90s came from offshore Louisiana, South Texas. Gas moved from south to north. As Alan showed now with the Marcellus, a lot of the gas is coming from the Marcellus or the Utica Shale, from the shale system. So our system is connected from South Texas, South Louisiana to North Concord, New Hampshire.
Actually, what I'm asking is, does your hardware, your pipe and valving fixtures, connections, does it actually go to the wellhead that's coming out of the ground?
No, we have an interconnect. We don't go to the wellhead. We have an interconnect on our pipeline and a valve and a meter on our pipeline. I'm sorry, I took it all the way to Texas.
There's just a lot of problems at the wellhead, as you know.
We are not in the, we as Tennessee Gas Pipeline are not in the wellhead business. We have an interconnect at our pipeline with a valve, an interconnect's a valve, and metering will be either us or the customer, and then the producer or midstream company will have that part of the pipe.
Thank you.
There are 3 people that have their hands up. That will be the end of the questions. First.
Thank you.
Let's assume that based on some documents available,
Louder,
it's visible
please. Louder,
that,
please.
You are going to meet some problems on this pipeline layout. If it's visible from documents, would you consider to change the layout before the survey or not? Or you still be willing to make a survey on this particular location you already achieved?
I guess I'd like to ask, what particular information are you presuming?
I'm presuming, first of all, the information which is available from Department of Environmental Protection,
Well, we
some
do that,
kind of, I'm sorry, some kind of vernal pools.
and we do
some-
that.
Uh,
As part of our survey, we do both of those. So that's in consideration of the routing. And Mark, I don't wanna get in your business, all right?
No, that's all right.
yeah, but,
I need some help.
what is visible, that, I already mentioned, that your, your projected layout hit the most sensitive part of the town.
And-
That's what we know.
Right, and you can, you wanna talk about it?
No, I mean, we,
That's a question, what's the point to make a survey before considering the most advantageous layout?
There's only, and, because we're going through it now, there's only so much that you can get on the known filed information, the known records, the known vernal pools. You can only find so much. We actually help identify this information for the state, for the archaeologists. We help give them information that they didn't have. So we consider all that information that's available publicly, but it's not the end all. We have to get on the ground to see what else is out there. Whether it's a four-toed salamander that they may not know they have habitats there, whether it's a spotted turtle. I couldn't tell you, they may not know that it's there, and we could find it. And then we create that new feature that's now.
What I
record.
mean, the local conservation commissions did a lot of work through the years to discover that in their town. I don't mean only our town, I believe that's the same story in any town. But,
So we gather as much as we can, but we still have to get on the property and physically.
okay, thank you, that's clear.
and we've made, through this process, we've had people looking at it, and we've made some modifications. So we're open to some modifications, we're not trying to close it, and we're trying to identify some of those, but sometimes it's, going from one to the other, but that's a good question and a good point for consideration on that, so.
Thank you.
Yes, put your hand.
I was wondering if our homeowners' insurance rates will go up because of this pipeline, and how much will it devalue our land? if the pipeline is built
And I can answer both of those, and again, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I've never, and I cover from Pennsylvania, New Jersey border to central Massachusetts to Syracuse, New York. So there's a lot of pipeline in that area. And I probably am responsible for thousands of landowners, and I have never had a landowner have a problem with their insurance whatsoever. So that's a good point, it's not an issue. We're liable for our liability, and honestly, I have never, ever had that problem, or any insurance company ever called me about that problem. And as far as devaluation, there are studies that are available, two recently that I've read, that indicate the value of the property on one side of the street with a pipeline, and the other side of the street without a pipeline is not affected. I'm not talking in my opinion, I'm talking about opinions that are non-industry specific by appraisers. So that's the information that I can pass on to you. If you want.
Appraisers that don't have a pipeline going through their property.
Right, if you want me to pass on that information, I'd be happy for you. If you'd be interested in reading, I'd be happy to do that. And if you see me after the meeting, I'd be happy to take maybe I'll send it to you.
Last question.
Just to clarify your statement on the easements and right of ways, permanent and temporary, because I'm getting confused, I'm starting to hear different numbers here. So the pipeline, the size of the pipeline we're speaking of is 30 to 36 inch, which requires a 50-foot permanent right of way, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. What is the temporary easement associated with that? I'm hearing ranges from 75, 50 to 125 feet.
And that's because we don't know yet. And that's
Yeah,
because
well,
we don't know.
What determines that?
I'll answer that. It varies. Through wetlands, you could be limited through wetlands, the way it is now with FERC, unless you can prove otherwise that you can't build it on that, it's 75 feet. So if you look at alignment, if you look at a map through wetlands, it's 75 feet. At the outside of it, through normal terrain, if you've got flat land, you might have 100 feet, just to get your equipment. If you've got hills, and you need to go blast some of the, or take some of this roadway to level it, you may need 125 feet. If you're in an agricultural land, you may need 125 feet, maybe more, because you're gonna take all the topsoil and you're gonna move it off the right of way to the side, stockpile it, build your pipeline, and bring your topsoil back. So when you, and at roads, you have others. It's not a simple answer. When you look at a map of workspace, it is literally different based on the terrain. And we don't wanna take any more space than's required, because from number one, from an environmental assessment, you don't wanna impact any more land than you have to build that pipeline. But because you have restraints at certain areas and at roads, you need bigger. So it is confusing, but there are variances. But the main thing would be a 50-foot permanent and anywhere from 100 to 125 feet average across, and then it will vary in other areas.
Okay, so just to go on record, Mr. Hartman, that is not the number we were given. It was much less than that. The permanent was 50, the temporary was an additional 25 feet, total 75. Now you're almost doubling that.
And I would have to apologize if that's what you're stating. So I'm glad that we have the information out for you this evening, because that is directly from the engineer, so I would apologize.
Okay. This meeting is adjourned. As long as the gentlemen from Kinder Morgan are willing to stay and answer questions, feel free to do that. I thank you for your patience. Good night.
That's probably what,